The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On the Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man." And then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors. In the case, they might invite you back for your repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
You know how I know that Catholics are very humble? They always choose the lowest place. They always sit in the back of the church. It doesn't work in this church. We're actually pretty filled. In some of the other smaller churches, that joke works very well. Today, Jesus teaches us an important lesson about humility, and he does so through this story of sharing a meal at the home of one of the leading Pharisees. And I think there's the clue right there from the start. This is somebody of great importance in contemporary Jewish society. Not just a Pharisee, one of the leading Pharisees, the most important religious sect of Jesus' day. And you can imagine the jockeying for position at the dinner table, seated by particular rank. But not only are they observing Jesus, it says they're observing him carefully because they want to try to do what? Entrap him. He's also observing them carefully. And he tells them that this is not what is most important, taking the highest place, that you should take instead the lowest place. It's a lesson on humility, I think, that's important for us as well. And you might ask, well, what is humility? Well, we know it by its fruits. When we say, I want to be humble, it's something that we have to work at. It's not something necessarily that is granted immediately by God. We also know it by its opposite, which is pride, which is one of the 7 capital or deadly sins. But at the base of humility is an acknowledgement for each of us that he is God and we are not. That we are not the captains of our own destiny. We are not the arbiters of what is true. That we, in our own actions, should seek not to glorify ourselves, but to seek to glorify God. When asked what are the 3 most important components of living a humble life, the famous theologian and bishop of Hippo, St. Augustine, once said, humilitas, humilitas, humilitas. Humility is that important. Now, the world, of course, seeks pleasure. The world, of course, values power, values money, and certainly one of the capital values of the world is pride. But we as Christians need to seek to do good for others before ourselves. And part of this is to seek that lowest place at the table, to put ourselves second and to put God first. Because when we put God first, then we also have to follow the corollary of loving neighbor as ourselves. Now, the message that Jesus gives us today is not an easy one, because, of course, whenever we accomplish something important, we do feel a sense of self-importance, a sense of pride. That in of itself is not the danger, but when we start putting our ego on a pedestal, seeking out things like celebrity, like places of honor, and distinction among our peers for their own sake and for our sake, and when God is left out of that equation altogether, that's where we can run into some trouble. Now, lest you think only average Christians are affected by this, if we look in the Gospels, the sin of pride, again, the opposite of humility, is really affected the apostles as well. If you recall back to Matthew chapter 20, when the mother of the sons of Zebedee, James and John, approached Jesus, and she said to him, "Command that these two sons of mine may sit at your right and left hand in your kingdom." In other words, give them places of prominence. And they're agreeing with mom, by the way. And what does Jesus say to them? He says to them, "Are you able to drink the cup as I am?" And they said they are able. In other words, are they able to follow him to the cross? But he ends that message by saying this. He said, "Whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first must be your slave." And then he said, "Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." So it is that life of service and humility that Jesus calls each of us to. As we know, the Pope, in one of his titles, a number of titles, as we know, my favorite, as I've told you before, but I think it bears repeating, is one of the greatest titles of the Pope, is the servant of the servants of God. We see that modeled beautifully by the late Pope Francis when he went to a prison in Rome on Holy Thursday and washed in his first year of his pontificate in 2013 and humbly washed the feet of 12 inmates, which was a change in that tradition. Normally he would wash the feet of his priests. He wanted to really show that our faith is one that is based very much in humility. I think that for us, the lesson is pretty clear, that in order to seek humility, we have to acknowledge those times when we have the ability to seek status, but instead seek to choose the lowliest place. And yes, to be sure, the world needs CEOs, the world needs leaders, the world needs bishops and presidents and prime ministers and the like. But they need these exalted earthly positions with a heart set upon God. They need these earthly positions of power with those who choose to work for the common good and not for selfish gain. Friends, our challenge today is the same challenge that Jesus gave the Pharisees. That when we put God first and put others ahead of ourselves by doing things as Jesus talks about in almsgiving, inviting the poor to our own dinner table, helping out the blind and those who are suffering from any kind of physical or emotional or mental malady, that we truly are then acting in the way Christ would have acted, which is with humility. It's one of those things that we can ask Christ to help us be humble, to do the good works that he calls us to do, but most importantly of all, and it's the first step of humility, to acknowledge that we are not God. God is God. When we put him first in our life, everything else will fall into place. And then truly, we will have that beautiful gift of being humble before the throne of our Almighty God.